Welcome back to the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We aim to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus. My name is Dakota Moody, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Michael Round, who loves the color yellow, and he's got his nice West Virginia colored shirt on today. Michael, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well. The day after West Virginia gets eliminated from the Big 12 tournament, and that effectively ends their season. I think they were 9-23, so I've heard it was said it was the worst basketball season we've ever had. So that's possible.
I think that's probably not too far off the case. I mean, especially growing up in the era of Bob Huggins as you have. It's been a long time since West Virginia's been that bad at basketball. So I had actually completely forgotten that the Big 12 tournament started yesterday, because Texas didn't have to play in the first games. They played today against Kansas State. So we'll see how far they can
For
get.
those that don't know, there are so many teams in the Big 12. The way they format that tournament is the worst teams don't have any buys, but the best teams have up to like 2 or 3 buys.
Oh yeah, no. The winner of the game today for Texas Kansas State has to play Iowa State, who's the 2 seed, who get to skip out on 2 different games to then come in and do that. Yeah, it's potentially crazy. I mean, if a team really stunk but got really hot, I mean the amount of games they'd have to play, I think, is like 5 in 5 days or something like that, which is pretty intense. Speaking of that, by the way, I saw the throwback to the was it the 7 overtime game, the UConn Syracuse overtime game in the Big East tournament the other day.
That.
Oh yeah, I mean,
that was what, 15 years?
Oh, it was such a crazy, something like that. I mean, it's something like that. It's been a long time since that. Well, Hashim the Beat was on that team for UConn. It was quite something. For those of you who don't care about this, though, I mean, we've been reminiscing for the last 30 minutes about soccer players and our teams from a long time ago. Obviously, me and Michael both had some rooting interest in the former Big East. Now the Big 12
yes
is a lot of our rooting grounds at this point. So it's quite something.
I think that was 2010, the year that West Virginia went to the Final Four, because they won the Big East tournament that year, I think.
Potentially so. I don't quite remember.
Or it was right around that time.
Or was the year I think it was, I want to say it was the year.
Might have been the year after.
The year before they went to the Final Four. I think it was the year before they went to the Final Four. Yeah, I want to say. Yeah, because I don't. Yeah, that's crazy times back in that day. But a lot of interesting things going on. It is March after all. Well, hopefully you all out there are filling out your brackets, because by the time this episode releases, by the way, I think the tournament will be announced, right? The bracket will be set
today. By the time this Sunday is Selection Sunday, so get your brackets ready.
Get your right. Get your brackets ready. And it's funny because
I guess on Thursday or something.
I guess it's pretty close to
the playing games. They got to play.
I'm about to say, I think probably like Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe even beforehand, whenever those playing games are. As long, I guess it's the amount of time it takes for those teams to get to that location, and they just start playing immediately. So yeah, and I'll make my brackets and probably do a lot better than I did whenever I actually watched a lot of college basketball. So I do not so much anymore. So we'll have to see, because I've always found that you can do as much research as you want to, but you can throw that out the window during March in that way.
Yep. Exactly. But speaking of reminiscing, we talked, I guess it's been probably a month or more ago, about Dakota thought I was such a boring child. Well, we discussed an event where we went snow tubing, and Dakota's dad found the photo of us snow tubing. And so we'll make sure and put that here in the video somehow so that you can see it if you'd like to.
Yes.
But yeah, Dakota and I have known each other a long time.
We really have. I can't imagine we're more than like 5 foot tall at this point. I don't. We were not probably like.
I mean, we're what, 7 or 8 in that?
Yeah, we're very young in this picture, and we're planning on putting this up in post production at this point. But yes, we could not have been very, very old at all at this point. Probably 7 or 8, not even 10 years old at this point. But I appreciate you've got your orange cap on because of your hunting days and experience, and I've got some orange boots on just because I'm obsessed with the color orange at this point in my life, and so we've got that going for us. But I wonder if that's the the end of one of our tubing sessions, how many more times you went down beyond that point?
Yeah, I don't know. Just amazing
This-
that a picture was taken while I was on a tube.
That's very true. We could also just be sitting on the sidelines because you didn't want to go back up again, and we just found
Yeah.
tubes to just sit in. I don't know.
For those that missed it, I had a traumatic experience when we were walking in. I saw a little girl, couldn't have been more than like 7 or 8, and her face was just all bloodied. And the emergency personnel were carrying her away, crying. And she had just gone down and gone too far and hit something
That's
in
right.
the face.
Well,
And so
because
I
here's
was
the
I
thing:
was terrified.
at that age, we're like, oh man, these older people that we can trust will catch us in those snow tubes. And now that
Yes.
you're an adult, you look back and you know those are high schoolers who do not care, who are getting paid under the table, probably below minimum wage, to catch kids at the bottom of this snow tubing facility.
Well, and you're the age too where you aren't able to slow yourself down very well.
No,
So you're just at the mercy of whoever else is there.
that is
So yeah,
correct.
anyways, I was just terrified. And I don't know. I didn't really have any reason to be, but yeah, maybe I
Well,
was boring.
it was because I'm about to say it's because, maybe it was that you were boring and you didn't like things that involved any particular chance of danger.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Still don't.
except by the way, and we'll get to our next segment after this point, but except when playing sports. At that point, Mike was willing to give
Yeah.
up his body in any way, shape, or form. To the point, by the way, and this is one of my favorite stories, is that we were playing ultimate frisbee at the church building, and there was a big field where we played ultimate frisbee at. And at the bottom of this field, which was kind of a hill because we're in West North Carolina and everything has an elevation change, there was a metal shed at the back end of what was our quote unquote end zone for this ultimate frisbee. And somebody throws a frisbee towards the back end of that end zone, and Michael's only got his eyes on one thing, and it is that frisbee. So he catches that frisbee, turns forward, and slams full force into that shed, metal shed. And the sound that metal shed made was miraculous. I don't even understand how those doors opened again based on the force that he hit this metal shed. But he held on to the frisbee.
Wasn't gonna drop it.
That's right. That's right. He said, I will not put my body in harm's way for snow tubing, but this ultimate frisbee game, it's life or death.
That's right.
That was Michael for you in athletics.
Yes.
So
Still
Michael,
is.
well, I'm about to say you still would do that. So Michael, but given everything we've been talking about, a lot of great memories we have and things in the world, but let's talk about where we have seen God in our lives this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been in continuing on. My father-in-law was sick last week, and at this point, it'll be almost 2 weeks, but he is doing a lot better. And so just the answered prayers. There's a lot of people that have been sick lately around here, and God is blessing those people, getting them well. And so that's definitely an answered prayer and where I've seen God, but also just in our time here in Tennessee, I feel that God has really blessed us in a lot of ways, and we are continuing and trying to develop good relationships, and we are, and that's really great. And so God is answering prayers in different arenas of our life, and so that's where I've seen him. What about you, man?
Fantastic. Yeah. And so we're very glad to hear your family's doing much better in that way. Always was blessing that when those we love can recover from things, from illnesses and things such as that. For myself, I was having a conversation with somebody this week, and I've heard this said before, but I'm believing it more and more as I've experienced it myself. The best way you could find a career that you can love is if you can find the intersection of your talents and interest, right? Finding an intersection between your talents and interest. And I think that goes beyond just career, right? Because certainly you can find a very rewarding career, a career you're not trying to get, do the minimum at and just get out of as soon as possible. Maybe like those high school kids who couldn't catch the tubers that well. They did not have interest or talents aligning in that way. Um, but I think that's obviously something good for your career. But I also think that we all have something like that we can use to serve God. Maybe that we don't realize it at this point or know it yet, but God gives talents. And I think God creates us with interest that we may not be able to see immediately. And I say this, this is all combining to what I wanted to say at this point where I've seen God is I'm having more and more of a realization. And I've known it for a little while, but I've had more and more of a realization that God has put me in a place in ministry, specifically in pulpit ministry, where the talents that he gave me and the interests that he molded into me have come together. And I really love preaching, and I feel like God has blessed me with the ability to do that, and I have enjoyed it so much, and I see God's hand in it because there was many times when I would have never been interested in preaching, and it would not have been something I would have thought of as a talent of mine. And then even when I was starting to think about ministry, going into ministry, it was not immediate in my mind that that was going to be something where my interest and talents aligned. But God knew what the end result was going to look like. He knew we would get to this day and beyond, what even the places I don't know. And so where I've seen God in my life is the fact that he in my life has formed the road to get me to this point where my interest and my talents align for him. And I encourage each person to look to see where their talents and interest can align in serving God. It may not be in a way like me and Michael in a ministerial career or being a missionary or youth minister or something like that. But there are lots of people as well at your local congregations out there who have found their interests and talents aligning for them to help in any number of areas, whether it's Bible class teaching or whether it's the people who maintain the building, you know. Because, for example, I don't have that talent or interest in any way, shape, or form to be able to be handy and do things around the building. And it is, am I a lesser man because of it? You can make that distinction yourself. But I'm not that good with those sorts of things. But God has given me a talent and ability with my words that maybe some of those who are very handy do not have. And so I can use my gift, hopefully, to bless and benefit them, and they can do the same because it would also be really bad to be preaching in a dark church building with no heating or air conditioning. And so I need them just as much as they hopefully can need me and my skills and talents. Really, we need them probably more than me. But I encourage everybody to look for where those areas are, where they can find that combination of both their talents that God has given them and their interest and be able to use that to then serve God, not just with a small portion of who you are, but with your whole being at that point, and really being able to dig in and do some great work in your life.
And that's the special thing about the church. We're all made differently and we're all made with a purpose,
Correct.
and God has blessed us in that way.
Absolutely.
So as we think about our passage in the Sermon on the Mount, we transition to another really good passage of scripture. We're winding down the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7. I'm going to go ahead and read verses 15 through 20. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruit. So, a warning from Jesus about false prophets, false teachers that appear good, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves. What apparent or what observations do you have from this passage, Dakota?
The idea that you will truly know somebody based on their actions, not necessarily in the honeyed words that they may say or the way in which they hope that you see them, but in who they truly are based on what they truly do.
Yeah.
I think this is very important for us, especially in a time, in a place where we can be so susceptible to kind of false prophets in our own way, in our modern day, that we find on social media. People doing
Hmm.
their theology based off of things they hear on social media um, can be a real problem. And I think this is something where we need to be looking for the fruits everywhere else to see what we can find out. But even more than that, even in our lives, in our local congregations, um, look for the fruits, right? Look for the fruits. Because if we come into a situation with a clear mind and clear eyes to see, I think we can save ourselves a lot of problems
Yeah.
if we look for the fruit. And I think this is why Jesus gives this warning, because if we truly have our eyes open, it will be clear to us who's bearing the bad fruit and who is bearing good fruit. And we should look towards people who bear the good fruit, and that is the good fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That should be where we look toward. And those who are the opposite of that should be people we are wary of.
Yeah. And I don't want to don't take what I say too far, but there's an element of judgment and discernment. We look at what people are doing and we align that with scripture
Yep.
and those fruits of the spirit. So we can determine based on what people are doing. This is something that we've been talking about at Westwood, this passage and this concept. Jesus later in Matthew talks about how, you know, the Pharisees, religious leaders, they can't speak good because they're evil. And that in that passage, he talks about from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's not that we're just created good or bad. It's
Hmm.
that what we're filling our mind with, what we're filling our heart with is good or bad to the point that that is what comes out. And
Yep.
so our fruits will be known by our fruits, yes, but those things start in our mind. They start in our heart, which are things Jesus talks about extensively. And so if you're having difficulty bearing good fruit, are you in the Word? If you don't know what the Spirit is teaching you, if you're not praying that the Spirit would lead you, um, then you're not going to get those kinds of fruit. And so you should
Right.
be looking inward in that and looking to God, obviously, for strength and for guidance in that. So
Yep.
we'll be able to see others, but for our own selves, we should be looking to the Word, looking to God, and praying that God would help us in this endeavor.
Now, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there by talking about what is our intake, right?
Yeah.
For both the outward and the inward, the intake of somebody will show, right? What you dedicate your time, efforts, energy to will influence who you are, and it will be shown. And so those who truly are changed by the Spirit are those who have that healthy diet of the Word of God, of prayer, of study, of devotion, of service, and in those ways you will see their good fruit. It is kind of impossible to take in all those good things and not bear good fruit, almost,
Yep.
right? Whereas on the other end of those things, people can put on the facade of good fruit, and us as well, by the way. We can put on the facade of good fruit, but eventually it will always show. If
Yep.
we've if we're not having that healthy diet, if we are a tree that is not getting the right nutrients as it would be, we will not produce that healthy fruit. It just won't
Yep.
happen. And so we need to be looking to our own selves about what our spiritual diets are, what we are taking in, and understanding, being self-aware enough, hopefully, to know if we are bearing good fruit or not. And also, this should be something we think about with other people as well. When we see what's going on in their lives, it's usually based on a malnutrition of the good things that they could be ingesting, and thus them not being able to produce the good fruit in that way. And hopefully, we can help them along the way, not beat them down or judge them, but help them um, by first helping ourselves in bearing good fruit. I think that's important for us
Absolutely.
to be able to understand. So, Michael,
Definitely.
as
And
we
so,
Go ahead.
Well, I'll just say one comment here. We're in the
Yeah.
middle of a podcast, a discipleship podcast. If you are still listening to this, you are on the right path. You're
Yes.
doing the right kinds of things. That this is the kind of stuff that you should be doing. Not that we're great in anything, but we're studying God's word. Like
Yeah.
we're involved in that. That's the important thing. So
Yeah. Hopefully you're
you're
taking
doing a good job.
if you were already taking time out of your day to try to get closer to God by being part of a discipleship podcast, you are most likely on the right path in that way already. So
And so, like a lot of these topics, I do have to wonder if we're just kind of preaching to the choir. But
yeah.
it's important to go through Jesus's words, and you never know. We never know, and you guys never know what we're going through, and a lot of times these passages are convicting to us too. So,
Yeah.
Dakota, what is it you've been reading lately? I know this is each of our books have a spiritual undertone. So, what is it you've been reading?
Yeah, well, I referenced this probably a couple weeks ago. I talked about the idea that I've been reading, studying into Sabbath and the idea of Sabbath, wanting to practice Sabbath and put that into my life in some ways. I've been reading this book, Sabbath as Resistance by Walter Brueggemann, and he talks about, and throughout his book, he's talking about resistance to a lot of things within our culture that are really bad, that are wrong, that can take us away from God, and we resist those things in Sabbath practice. And so he talks about in this chapter that I've been reading, Sabbath is resistance to anxiety, and he talks about how when the people of Israel are meeting God at Mount Sinai, they have just been in this slavery bondage in Egypt where they are in a constant system of anxiety because it goes from the top down where Pharaoh was anxious about production and storage of grain and all these sorts of things. And so because of his level of anxiety, that trickles down to the people who are then anxious because they are in a constant state of production to build up the granaries and things like that to store the food that was originally the anxiety of the Pharaoh that goes all the way down to them, and they are responsible for continuously having to fill these quotas, and their life is completely uh, based in production and consumption, and they are in this continual cycle of anxiety because of the constant need to produce more than consuming, and it comes from the top down. And so when God introduces himself to the people at Mount Sinai, he is saying, Pharaoh, who considered himself a god, wanted you to work all the time and wanted you to keep going because he was anxious about having enough and producing and all these things. But I am the Lord, and I want you to follow my example because I am a God who rests, who was rested, who worked 6 days and then rested on the seven, showing you that you can also break this continual anxiety cycle of production and consumption and worrying about everything continuously working in this way. And in this, they are understanding and knowing their God at this point. They're the new head, their new leader. And the quote that he gives that I think is just so good on page 31 and 32, he says, "So imagine, says Moses out at Mount Sinai, you who engage in production and consumption are not little replicas of anxiety-driven Pharaoh. You are in the image of the Creator God who did not need to work to get ahead, nor do you. God invites the ones at Sinai to a new life of neighborly freedom in which Sabbath is the cornerstone of faithful freedom. Such faithful practice of work stoppage is an act of resistance. It declares in bodily ways that we will not participate in the anxiety system that pervades our social environment. We will not be defined by busyness and by acquisitiveness, acquiring things, and by pursuit of more in either our economics or our personal relationships or anywhere in our lives, because our life does not consist in commodity. I think this is a very important lesson for us today because we are kind of in a lot of anxiety systems where it's constantly consumption, production, getting ahead, doing things, and we have a really hard time in America in the 21st century in being able to stop, trust God, put our anxieties and worries on Him, taking off the yoke of the worldly anxieties and production and consumption and putting on the yoke of God, that trust in Him, and that yoke is light and easy at that point. And we need to be able to do that and break that chain. And this is why I felt like it's important to involve myself in Sabbath in this way to do this. But I think it's really important for us that we can take some time away, break that cycle, and give that to God, trust in Him that He can do this, so that, as He points out, we can look to not to people as commodities to be used or ways in which to get ahead, but as brothers and sisters who've been created in the image of God, not in the image of Pharaoh or man or companies or consumption, and breaking out of those chains and being able to look to God and say, I trust in you, I look to you. I don't need to always worry about getting ahead because you will supply and you will take care of me. And I think that's something that's really important for us in the modern day, because if I say you have to take a whole day off, how many people would actually do that? Because they would say,
Right.
I can't because I've got boom, 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 boom. We've got to be able to refine, I think, this idea that we can trust in God, we can take that day, and we can look to Him.
We were talking earlier about just our busyness in life, and this is something that ministry, ministers are guilty of too. But just talk. In South Carolina, we lived about a mile or two from the interstate, and on a cool or even cold, clear morning, even over a mile away, you could hear the constant noise of the interstate, the constant noise of the road. And I just think about our lives like that. It's just a constant sound of traffic, of noise,
Yeah.
Or whatever that goes along. And even when
Yeah.
we take days off, we often have to do things at our home. We have to work at home because we haven't had any time to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very difficult to practice Sabbath. And I really like what Brueggemann talks about there. You're sharing just how anxiety driven Egypt was and how they were enslaved. They didn't have choice. And when they had it, God is saying, hey, you need to set aside time to rest,
Yeah.
to be at a pause. And that actually really segues well into what I'm going to talk about from Orthodoxy. We've been reading that by G.K. Chesterton. Been a good book, and it's really, really getting good too. He talks about how the whole case for Christianity is that a man who is dependent upon the luxuries of this life is a corrupt man, spiritually corrupt, politically corrupt, financially corrupt. There is one thing that Christ and all the Christian saints have said with a sort of savage monotony. They have said simply that to be rich is to be in peculiar danger of moral wreck.
Mm.
Jesus said it's very hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Very hard. And we fight and struggle and wrestle to get ahead in life. And I'm guilty of this as well. And it's like, well, what are we fighting for? And if we got it, is it even something worth chasing? Chesterton is talking. He's trying to find a case for Christianity, and he's found a lot of good ones. But one of them is that as societies, we look to the rich, and when we try and better people's life, we try and make them wealthier.
Right.
We try and lift up the poor. We try and help the hurting, and we do it often through financial means. And many of those things are good, but with that carries the assumption that people's lives will inherently be better if they had more.
Yep.
And what he is saying is Christianity is so believable and so true in that when people get more, it often leads to destruction. And Christianity's been teaching that for thousands of years. So maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit on what we worry about and what we are striving after.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a perfect segue combining. We didn't talk about these things beforehand that we were talking about together, but yeah, we are so constantly looking for that to get ahead, that pursuit of more, that pursuit of more things, and what has always been true and will always be true is when we pursue more, we will never have enough. right?
Yep.
Because even when we get to that next level, we will look to get to the next, and we'll look to get to the next, and we'll continue on in that way. And all it does really is put us in that danger of moral wreck. Because at the cost of striving after those things, we can so easily lose our soul. We can so easily lose our focus on God, and we can become those anxiety-ridden people who are just constantly looking to step over people potentially to get more, or to see people as a way to collect and to achieve more, rather than somebody who is looking out for the better interest of others and looking as to how they can serve God with what God has given them, and with their lives in general. And so I think as disciples of Christ, we need to be looking towards how we can be rich in faith, how we can be rich in God and not rich in the things of this world, and not constantly looking towards how we can get ahead and get more, but instead looking as to how we can give back to God and others.
Absolutely. So we hope you have a great day, and we hope that you have strength in this. This is a difficult thing, and we should pray for one another in that we lay aside that attitude of consumption and anxiety as much as we can. So we thank you for joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God, learn from his word, and live out his teachings. Bye for now.